Something is happening in your body right now. Not because you are sick, not because anything has gone wrong in the way a doctor would measure, but if you have felt genuinely alone recently, not just physically alone, but the specific kind of alone where the people around you don't quite reach you. Your immune system has already responded. Your inflammatory markers have risen, your cortisol is dysregulated, your brain has begun scanning the people around you for threats it wasn't looking for before. Loneliness is not a feeling. The research is increasingly clear that it is a biological state, and what it does to a body is stranger and more precise than most people assume. Let's start with what loneliness actually is. Loneliness is not just about being alone. It is not introversion, nor is it a preference for quiet environments, which society has deemed a type of mental disorder or disease. According to the researcher's definition, loneliness is a gap between the amount of social contact you desire and the amount of social contact you actually have. The number of people around you is almost irrelevant. What the body responds to is the quality, whether the connections you have feel safe, reciprocal, and meaningful. John Cacioppo, a neuroscientist at the University of Chicago who spent decades studying loneliness, defined it as perceived social isolation. The body's response to that perception is what the research spent years trying to map. The first thing loneliness does is put the body on alert. Cacioppo's research identified what he called the sociometer, the brain's continuous contextual assessment of the quality of your social connections. When that assessment drops below a threshold, the body does not register social discomfort. Instead, it registers it as a threat. The same biological cascade that fires when the body anticipates physical harm begins. Cortisol rises. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which controls our body's response to stress, becomes dysregulated. At the same time, inflammatory markers in the body, including interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, increase. The body is not responding to how you feel about being alone. It is responding to what being alone has meant for most of human evolutionary history, which is danger. This is not a subtle effect. In 2015, Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad at Brigham Young University published a meta-analysis covering more than 3 million participants across multiple continents. Loneliness was associated with a 26% increase in the risk of premature death, social isolation with 29%, living alone with 32%. The magnitude of the risk, Holt-Lunstad noted, exceeded that of obesity and physical inactivity. The comparison that traveled furthest from her research was this: the mortality risk of lacking social connection is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Not as a metaphor, as a population-level finding from a meta-analysis of more than 200 studies. The immune response is the mechanism most researchers focus on. Chronic loneliness keeps the body in a sustained state of low-level inflammation. The immune system, operating under continuous stress system activation, shifts its behavior. It becomes more adept at fighting bacterial threats, the kind of physical injury that was feared after social isolation in ancient times, but loses its ability to fight viruses. The body is preparing for a wound. It is not preparing for a cold. A study published in the journal Psychological Science found that lonely individuals showed significantly different gene expression patterns in immune cells compared to non-lonely individuals, the body rewriting its own operating instructions in response to perceived social isolation. Next, let's talk about what loneliness does to the brain. Another researcher at the University of Chicago, Stephanie Cacioppo, led a study published in the journal Cognitive Neuroscience in 2016 that found that lonely people perceive and analyze social threats differently at a neurological level. Their brains can detect social threat signals much faster and more automatically than normal people. The effect was not conscious. It happened before the participant was aware a threat had been detected. The brain of a lonely person has recalibrated its threat detection system around the assumption that the social environment is dangerous, and that recalibration changes behavior. Lonely people are more likely to interpret neutral social cues as hostile, more likely to expect rejection, more likely to withdraw in ways that produce the rejection they anticipated. The biology creates the conditions that sustain the biology. This is what the research means when it says loneliness is self-perpetuating. It is not a character flaw reinforcing itself. It is a physiological state recalibrating a nervous system around an assumption of danger, and that recalibrated nervous system making the danger more likely. The harder question is the one the data raises but cannot fully answer. Whether the person inside that biology, the one whose inflammatory markers have risen, whose brain is scanning for threats, whose immune system has shifted toward preparing for physical harm, experiences any of this consciously. The loneliness is felt. What the body does in response to it happens below the level of feeling entirely. You don't decide to raise your inflammatory markers. You don't choose cortisol dysregulation. Your body reads the quality of your connections and responds to what it finds. It has been doing this for as long as your species has existed. It does not know you live in a world where being alone is sometimes chosen, sometimes temporary, sometimes fine. It only knows what alone has always meant.